大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。有一个女人，她从来不穿裙子，她从来不按剧本生活，她从来不在乎别人怎么看她。在一个女演员必须妆容精致、举止温柔的时代，她穿着宽腿长裤走进派拉蒙片场，片场高层把她的裤子没收了。她的反应是神魔，她就光着腿在整个片场走来走去，泰然自若，毫无尴尬，直到片场把裤子还给她为止。这个女人叫凯撒琳·赫本，她是好莱坞黄金时代最不驯服的女性。她用整整60年的职业生涯告诉这个世界，女人不需要被驯服。凯撒琳·赫本于1909年5月12日出生于美国康乃狄克州哈特福德市。她的家庭背景相当不寻常，父亲托马斯·赫本是一位著名的泌尿科医生，他思想开明，鼓励孩子独立思考。母亲凯撒琳·何顿·赫本是一位积极的社会运动家，她推动女性投票权，同时也是计划生育运动的重要倡议者。在那个年代，这些都是极为敏感的议题，但赫本家的人从不回避敏感的事物，他们有自己的规则，或者更精确地说，他们的规则就是没有什么不可以讨论，没有什么不可以质疑。这样的家庭环境，在凯撒琳幼小的心灵里种下了一颗种子，那颗种子的名字叫做独立。在那个年代，很多女孩从小就被教导要温柔贤淑，要学习如何取悦他人，要让自己成为一个令人舒适的存在。但赫本家的孩子被教导的是完全不同的事情，学会思考，学会反抗不公正，学会做自己。凯撒琳的母亲常带她参加妇女参政运动的集会，小凯撒琳就站在那些广场上，看着一群勇敢的女性高举标语，大声宣告自己的权利。那些女性有的是家庭主妇，有的是老师，有的是工厂女工，但她们站在一起的那一刻，都是平等而勇敢的人。这些画面深深刻入了凯撒琳的灵魂，成为她日后不肯妥协的养分，也让她理解了一件事：改变是可能的，但改变需要有人站出来。凯撒琳有4个兄弟姐妹，她和大哥汤姆感情最深。汤姆是一个聪明活泼的男孩，深受家人喜爱。兄妹2人无话不说，一起读书，一起玩耍，一起探索这个世界的每一个角落。1921年春天，凯撒琳12岁，她去找汤姆，却在家中的阁楼上发现了令她崩溃的景象。汤姆上吊身亡。那一天是他生命中最黑暗的一天，没有人知道汤姆为什么选择这样离开。有人说是意外，有人说是自杀，这个谜从未被解开。凯撒琳后来在回忆录中写道，失去汤姆让他整个人都变了。他开始把自己的生日定在汤姆去世的那天，好像用这种方式让哥哥继续活在他的生命里。那种失去至亲的痛苦，让他变得更加坚硬，也更加珍惜活着的每一刻。心理学家说，童年的巨大失落往往会塑造一个人最核心的性格。对赫本来说，汤姆的离去让他更清楚地知道，生命是短暂的，你必须活出真正属于自己的样子，否则就是浪费了这仅有一次的机会。赫本在布林莫尔学院念书时便展现出惊人的表演天分，他主修戏剧，参演了多出校园舞台剧。那段时间，他像一颗刚被磨出光泽的钻石，还带着粗糙的边角，但光芒已经藏不住了。毕业后，他立刻投身百老汇。那段出闯江湖的时光非常辛苦，他被解雇过不止一次，被剧评人批评过。有一个制作人当面告诉他，你的声音太奇怪了，你的骨架太大了，你的脸不够好看，换一行吧。还有人说他走路的样子太强势，说他的笑容不够甜美，说他永远没办法让观众喜欢他。但凯撒琳·赫本从来不是那种会乖乖听话的人，她继续演，继续磨练自己的技艺，继续等待属于她的那个机会。那种在被否定中持续前进的韧性，就是她一生性格的缩影。她后来说过，失败只有一种，那就是放弃。1932年，那个机会终于来了。 她在电影《一个女人的自白》中担任要角，立刻引起好莱坞的广泛注意。隔年她主演《尘灰一片》，饰演一个为的是艺术不惜一切的女演员。这个角色简直就是为她量身打造的。她在片中饰演的夏娃洛弗莱斯，是一个从乡下来到纽约追求演员梦的年轻女子。她偏执，她自我，她为的是登上舞台可以不择手段，但同时她也真诚，也脆弱，也充满了令人怜爱的渴望。赫本把这个角色演得入木三分，评论界一片惊叹。她凭着这个角色拿下了她的第一座奥斯卡最佳女主角奖。那年她才26岁，好莱坞都在说，这个女孩是天才，这个女孩有未来，但没有人知道，这只是她漫长传奇的开端。凯撒琳·赫本在外形上完全不符合当时好莱坞的审美标准。那个年代流行的是娇小玲珑、温柔依人的女星形象，闭眼金发，娇小甜美，说话轻声细语。但赫本完全不是这样。她身材高挑，骨骼清晰，有着一张棱角分明的脸。她说话带着特殊的康乃狄克上流社会口音，又急又快，充满了强烈的个人风格。天生就有一股骄傲感浮现在她的举手投足之间。更重要的是，她喜欢穿裤子。在那个年代，裤子被认为是男性的服装，女性穿裤子被视为有失体面，甚至在某些美国城市，女性穿男装是违反的方法规的。但赫本就是要穿。她说裤子让她感到自由，让她可以走路、奔跑、爬上爬下，不需要担心裙摆，不需要表演那个端庄静坐、等待被欣赏的女性形象。有一次，片场的服装部门把她的裤子偷偷没收，希望借此逼她换上裙子。赫本的反应是神魔，她就光着腿在片场走来走去，毫不在意旁人的眼光，一步一步，从容不迫，直到片场只好把裤子还给她。这个故事在好莱坞广为流传，成为赫本最著名的反抗传说之一。它的意义不只在于一条裤子，而在于一个女性用身体实践她的主张。那是一种无声的宣言，清晰而有力。透过这条裤子，赫本告诉好莱坞，告诉整个世界，你无法用剥夺来让我妥协，因为我比你以为的更加自由。1930年代中期到后期，赫本的事业遭遇了严重的挫折。她接连主演了几部票房失败的电影，观众开始对她感到疲倦，批评她太自以为是，批评她的表演太过自我，缺乏亲和力。1938年，一个由美国院线业者组成的委员会，将她列入了所谓的票房毒药名单，名单上还有其他几位知名影星。但这份名单对赫本来说是一个沉重的打击，意味着片场不愿意再冒险启用她。面对这样的困境，很多演员会选择妥协，接受片场的要求，改变形象，迎合市场的口味，说白了就是放弃做自己。但凯撒琳·赫本不是这样的人，她做了一个在当时被认为相当大胆的决定，直接从片场买回了自己的合约，然后亲自去挑选剧本。她相信只要找到正确的角色，她就能再次证明自己的价值。她挑中的是一部由菲利普·贝里写的舞台剧，名叫《费城故事》。她不只主演这部作品，她还担任了制片的角色，确保整部电影能够完全照她的意思来拍摄。1940年《费城故事》上映，大获成功，票房与口碑双丰收。赫本用这部电影完成了一次令所有人瞠目结舌的职业复活，再次站回了好莱坞的顶点。这个故事告诉我们一件很重要的事情，被打倒不代表结束，真正的问题是你打算怎么站起来。有些人会在跌倒之后乖乖服输，但赫本选择的是自己重新设计游戏规则。说到凯撒琳·赫本的人生，绝对无法跳过史宾赛屈赛这个名字。1941年，赫本与屈赛在电影《女人万岁》的片场第一次相遇。传说赫本见到屈赛时说了一句话，大意是他恐怕对他来说太高了。屈赛的回答很妙，说别担心，他会把它调低的。这句话听起来像是玩笑，却预示了两人此后27年的深刻关系。 赫本与屈塞一共合作了9部电影，包括一些影史上的重要作品。在荧幕上的化学反应令无数观众着迷，他们的对手戏有一种奇特的张力，像两股强大的电流相遇，既有冲击，又有温度，两个人旗鼓相当，没有谁是附属品。这种平等感在那个年代是相当罕见的荧幕组合，但他们的爱情故事却隐藏在阴影之中。因为屈塞已婚，他有妻子路易斯·屈塞，有2个孩子。作为虔诚的天主教徒，他不能离婚，而且他拒绝离婚，因为他认为这是他对上帝的承诺。两人的关系从未公开承认，却是好莱坞人人皆知的秘密。记者们知道，制片厂知道，甚至连路易斯本人也知道，但大家都保持着某种沉默的默契。赫本为的是屈塞几乎完全退出了公众视野，他拒绝了无数的采访邀约和公开活动，把自己最宝贵的时间给了这个他深深爱着的男人。他为他煮饭，照顾他的健康，陪伴他度过晚年酗酒和病痛的岁月。1967年，屈塞在完成两人最后一部合作电影《猜猜谁来吃晚餐》的17天之后，因心脏病突然离世。赫本强忍着眼泪，没有出席屈塞的葬礼，因为他不想让屈塞的妻子难堪。他说，那是路易斯的时刻，不是他的。这种无声的牺牲，让人看见了赫本性格中最柔软而深情的那一面。钢铁之下，有一颗真正懂得爱的心。凯撒琳·赫本的感情世界远比大众所知的更加复杂。年轻时，她嫁给了剧作家路德福音，两人在1928年走入婚姻，但婚姻只维持了短短6年。赫本后来说，她和英之间有很深的感情，但她不是适合婚姻的人。她需要自由，她需要空间，她需要做自己想做的事，而婚姻这个制度让她感到窒息。离婚后，她和英保持了一辈子的友谊，英甚至在晚年成为的是她的财务顾问。这种把前任转化为挚友的能力，某种程度上说明了赫本对人际关系的高度智慧。她知道如何爱一个人，也知道如何在爱结束之后还保留其中最好的部分。除了屈塞，赫本生命中还有一个重要的名字，那就是导演约翰·福特。两人在1930年代合作了几部电影，也发展出一段深刻的情感连结。福特后来说，赫本是他认识的最有才华的女人之一。这几段感情关系描绘出赫本感情世界的轮廓。她不是不懂爱，她只是用自己的方式去爱，从不以失去自我为代价。1950年代，好莱坞进入了电视时代的冲击期，许多电影明星开始走下坡，但赫本却以一种令人惊讶的方式持续进化。1951年，她主演了《非洲皇后》，与著名男演员亨弗莱·鲍嘉搭档，在当时条件极为恶劣的非洲刚果时的拍摄。那次拍摄过程中，剧组成员相继因感染生病倒下，食物和干净的水都严重短缺，但赫本据说始终保持健康。她的秘诀是只喝煮沸过的水，而鲍嘉则豪迈地认为威士忌是最好的消毒剂。非洲皇后成为的是影史上的经典之作。赫本在片中饰演一个严谨拘谨的传教士之妹罗斯塞耶，外表看似古板保守，但在危机中展现出令人意想不到的勇气和机智。这个角色打破了观众对她以往强势形象的固有印象，让世人看见了她作为演员的多元层次。一个真正的演员是可以无限变化的，赫本就是这样的演员。每一个角色在她手里都能活出自己的灵魂。1969年，赫本更跨界到百老汇舞台，主演音乐剧《可可儿》，饰演传奇时装设计师可可夏奈尔。赫本和夏奈尔有着某种灵魂上的深刻近似，两人都是各自领域中打破规则的先行者。夏奈尔解放了女性的身体，让女性从紧身束腰中走出来；赫本解放了女性的自我意识，让女性看见一个不服从也可以伟大的榜样。这出音乐剧大受欢迎，赫本的演出得到了观众的热烈回应，在百老汇连续演出超过1年。这一次转型再次证明了赫本的艺术生命力。她不只是一位电影演员， 她是一个全方位的表演艺术家。凯撒琳·赫本一生共获得了12次奥斯卡最佳女主角提名，这个数字本身就是一个传奇，没有任何其他演员达到过这个纪录。在所有提名中，她4度夺得最佳女主角奖，分别是《晨辉》、《猜猜谁来吃晚餐》、《东施》以及《长日将尽》。4座奥斯卡，横跨34年，从1933年到1981年，这样的跨度在整个电影史上都是独一无二的。她的第4座奥斯卡是在74岁时拿下的。74岁，很多演员在这个年龄早已淡出荧幕，但赫本还在燃烧，还在创造，还在让全世界的观众惊叹。这让我想起中国古语说的“老骥伏枥，志在千里”。赫本就是那匹烈马，岁月可以让她的脸增添皱纹，却无法扑灭她心中的熊熊火焰。凯撒琳·赫本对女性意识的影响超越了她的电影本身。在一个女演员通常只是男主角附属品的年代，赫本饰演的女性角色有着强烈的主体性，她们有自己的想法，有自己的判断力，有时候她们比电影里的男人更聪明、更勇敢、更有趣。赫本拒绝扮演那种被动受害的女性形象。她说过一句很著名的话，大意是如果你服从所有的规则，你就会错过所有的乐趣。这句话是她人生态度的精华所在，她用整个人生在实践这句话，不服从，不妥协，不消失。她的存在本身就是一种宣言。一个女性可以是棱角分明的，可以是不讨好的，可以是不符合任何标准的，但仍然可以伟大，仍然可以让人无法忽视，仍然可以在历史上留下无法抹去的印记。赫本晚年定居在康乃狄克州老塞布鲁克的海边别墅，这栋房子古她从小就认识的地方，充满了家族记忆和童年的气息。她终生未再婚，选择以一种完全自主的方式生活，每天游泳、打网球、读书、种花。她说她的生活是她的，没有人可以替她做主。晚年的她依然保持着那股犀利的个性，拒绝了大多数的采访请求，只在她认为值得的时候开口说话。有一次，一位记者问她，为什么她不愿意多接受采访？她的回答很直接，她说因为大多数人问的问题都不够有趣。这个回答太赫本了，直接，不客气，但又带着某种令人莞尔的诚实。那种诚实是她性格的核心，她从不说假话，就算假话更讨人喜欢。2003年6月29日，凯撒琳·赫本在睡梦中安详辞世，享年96岁。当她去世的消息传出，整个好莱坞陷入了一种特殊的沉默。那种沉默不只是在悼念一位女演员，更像是在向一个时代致敬。一个女性开始用自己的方式定义自己的时代。全美各大报的头版都刊出了她的消息，电影界的人们纷纷发表追悼。但最令人动容的是那些普通观众寄来的信件。很多人说，赫本让他们相信做自己是可以的，做一个不符合标准的女性是可以的。这样的影响力，不是任何一座奖杯可以衡量的。凯撒琳·赫本的影响力在她去世之后并未消散，反而随着时代的演进而不断扩大。当我们谈论女性在职场上的自主权，当我们讨论女性在穿着上的自由，当我们欣赏那些不符合传统审美标准却魅力十足的女性，赫本的影子就在那里。她一生获得了无数荣誉，美国电影学院将她列为影史上最伟大的女演员第一名，没有之一。她入选了美国喜剧名人堂，她的名字被用来命名一颗小行星。但我想赫本自己最在乎的，不是那些奖项和名号，而是她活出了她想要的样子。她从未让任何人把她变成另一个人。这种对自我的坚守，在这个充满压力要求人们妥协和改变的世界里，是一种极其稀有的能力。有一个关于赫本晚年的小故事。她在接受采访时，记者问她，如果人生可以重来，你会改变什么吗？赫本想了一想，然后说不会。她不会改变任何事。她犯过错，她伤过人，她也被伤过。 但她始终是她自己，这就够了。这句话让我想到中国道家的一个核心观念：知足者富。赫本从未用外界的标准来衡量自己的价值，她有自己的量尺，她按照那把量尺生活，然后在96岁安静地离开，没有遗憾，也不需要遗憾，因为她每一天都活得像是自己的。让我们最后再想想她的那条裤子，那条被片场没收的裤子，那条让赫本宁愿光着腿走遍片场也要讨回来的裤子。那条裤子不只是一件衣服，它是一个宣言。他说，我的身体是我的，我的选择是我的，我的人生是我的，没有任何人可以用衣服、用规则、用期待来定义我是什么样的人。凯撒琳·赫本用她完整的人生为这个宣言作证。而今天，当我们站在一个女性可以穿任何衣服的时代，可以进入任何行业的时代，可以追求任何梦想的时代，我们应该记得，这条路是有人走出来的。赫本就是走在最前面的那个人之一，她走得笔直，走得骄傲，从不回头。向凯撒琳·赫本致敬，感谢她的不驯服，感谢她的骄傲，感谢她让我们知道，真正的自由从来不是别人给的，是自己争取来的。我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. There is a woman who never wore skirts. A woman who never lived by the script. A woman who never cared what the world thought of her. In an era when actresses were expected to be perfectly groomed and gently feminine. She walked into Paramount Studios wearing wide-leg trousers. The studio executives confiscated her pants. Her response was to walk through the entire studio complex bare-legged, calm, unbothered, and completely at ease. Until they returned her trousers. That woman was Katharine Hepburn. She was the most untamable woman of Hollywood's golden age. And over a career spanning 60 years, she told the world one unwavering truth. Women do not need to be tamed. Katharine Hepburn was born on May 12, 1909, in Hartford, Connecticut. Her family was anything but ordinary. Her father, Thomas Hepburn, was a distinguished urologist. He was a man of progressive ideas who actively encouraged his children to think for themselves. He believed education was not merely about acquiring facts. It was about learning to question everything, including the questions themselves. Her mother, Katharine Hepburn, was a passionate and tireless social activist. She campaigned fiercely for women's voting rights. She marched. She organized. She spoke at public rallies and wrote letters to newspapers. She was also a prominent advocate for access to birth control. A cause that in that era could make a woman deeply unpopular. In that period both of these were deeply controversial positions to hold openly. But the Hepburn household never shied away from controversy. They operated by their own set of principles. Or more precisely, their guiding principle was that nothing was too sensitive to discuss. Nothing was too sacred to question. This was the environment that shaped young Katharine from her earliest days. It planted a seed deep in her character. A seed whose name was independence. And a second seed whose name was the conviction that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of wrong. The Hepburn family dinner table was, by all accounts, a place of lively debate. No position was safe from examination. No assumption was allowed to go unchallenged simply because it was old. The children were expected to form their own views and defend them. Not to defer automatically to their parents or to whatever the neighbors believed. This was unusual in a deeply conventional era. Most middle-class American households at the time operated on the principle of children being seen and not heard. The Hepburn household was different. It was a place where a young girl was taught to think of herself as a full participant in the world of ideas. Not a future decoration for someone else's story, but a person with her own story already underway. At a time when most girls were raised to be gentle and pleasing. To learn the art of making others comfortable. To become a soothing and agreeable presence in every room they entered. The Hepburn children were taught something fundamentally different. Learn to think for yourself. Learn to stand against injustice. Learn to be exactly who you are. Katharine's mother often brought her along to rallies for the women's suffrage movement. Young Katharine stood in those public squares watching. She saw courageous women raising their banners and declaring their rights out loud. Some of those women were housewives. Some were teachers. Some were factory workers. Some were young women who had traveled hours to be there. All of them ordinary people in their daily lives. But in standing together in those moments they became something larger than ordinary. They were equal and they were brave. Those images were seared into Katharine's soul. They became the fuel for a lifetime of refusing to compromise. And they taught her something she never forgot. Change is possible. But change requires someone willing to step forward first. Someone willing to be inconvenient. Someone willing to be uncomfortable. Someone willing to be told they are wrong and keep going anyway. Katharine had 4 siblings. She was closest to her older brother Tom. Tom was a bright and spirited boy. Deeply loved by everyone in the family. The two of them talked about everything. They read together, played together, and explored every corner of the world around them. Tom had a particular warmth and energy that made everyone who knew him want to be near him. He was the kind of person who made a room feel more alive just by being in it. In the spring of Ijo, when Katharine was 12 years old, she went to find Tom one morning and discovered him in the family attic. He had hanged himself. That day was the darkest of her life. No one ever knew for certain why Tom made that choice. Some believed it was an accident, the result of a game or experiment gone terribly wrong. Some believed it was intentional. The mystery was never resolved. Katharine later wrote in her memoirs that losing Tom changed her entirely. She began observing her own birthday on the anniversary of his death. As though by doing so she could keep him alive within her own life. That grief hardened her. It built walls around her that nothing could easily penetrate. And it made her treasure every living moment with a fierce and deliberate intention. Psychologists often observe that profound loss in childhood shapes the deepest core of who a person becomes. For Hepburn, the loss of Tom clarified something essential that she carried for the rest of her life. Life is short. Life is fragile. You must live as your truest self. Otherwise you are simply wasting the one and only chance you have been given. That conviction never left her. Not when studios told her she was wrong. Not when audiences turned away. Not when the world said she should be something other than what she was. During her time at Bryn Mawr College, Hepburn already showed remarkable ability as a performer. She majored in drama and appeared in multiple campus productions. She threw herself into every role with a commitment that some found startling. In those years she was like a diamond just beginning to be polished. Still rough around the edges. But the light inside could not be contained. After graduating she threw herself headlong into Broadway. Those early years were genuinely difficult. Not just professionally but personally. She was fired more than once from productions that initially seemed promising. She was dismissed by critics who found her mannered or excessive. One producer told her directly and without apparent regret. Her voice was too unusual. Her physical frame was too large. Her face was not attractive enough. She should consider finding a different line of work entirely. Others said her walk was too aggressive for a leading lady. Her smile was not warm or approachable enough. She would never be someone audiences could warm to. Some people in her position might have taken those assessments to heart. Might have begun the long, slow process of sanding down their edges to fit the expected shape. But Katharine Hepburn was never the kind of person who listened to advice like that. She kept performing. She kept refining her craft. She kept waiting for the moment that was genuinely meant for her. That capacity to keep moving forward even while being told repeatedly that she was not enough. That is the very essence of who she was. She said later in life, "There is only one kind of failure. And that is giving up." In Ijo, her moment finally arrived. She took a key supporting role in the film called A Bill of Divorcement. The film starred the distinguished actor John Barrymore. And Hepburn more than held her own opposite one of Hollywood's most formidable presences. She immediately caught the attention of directors, producers, and critics across the industry. The following year she starred in the film called Morning Glory. Playing an actress willing to sacrifice everything for her art. The character, Eve Lovelace, was a young woman who arrived in New York from the countryside chasing her dream of becoming a great actress. She was obsessive and self-absorbed. She would stop at almost nothing to reach the stage. But she was also genuine, deeply vulnerable, and full of an aching kind of longing. A longing that made audiences feel the full weight of everything she wanted. Hepburn played that role with extraordinary precision and emotional depth. The critical response was one of genuine astonishment. She won her first Academy Award for Best Actress for that performance. She was only 26 years old. Hollywood was saying she was a genius. Hollywood was saying she had a brilliant future stretching out before her. But no one knew yet. This was only the beginning of a legend that would span 6 more decades. And that would outlast every prediction anyone made about her in those early years. In terms of physical appearance, Katharine Hepburn did not conform to Hollywood's standard of beauty at the time. The prevailing feminine ideal in those years favored petite, soft, and yielding women. Fair skin, golden hair, a small and delicate frame. A gentle smile and a voice that never demanded anything. But Hepburn was none of those things. She was tall, with clearly defined and angular bone structure. She had a face of striking sharp planes and pronounced angles. A face that was not traditionally pretty but was utterly impossible to forget. She spoke with a distinctive Connecticut upper-class accent. Fast and emphatic, full of intelligence and a powerful personal style. And she carried a natural air of pride in every single movement she made. Most significantly, she loved to wear trousers. In that era, trousers were widely considered men's clothing. Women wearing trousers was seen as improper and deeply unladylike. In certain American cities, a woman dressed in men's clothing could actually be cited for violating local ordinances. Some jurisdictions had actual laws against it. But Hepburn wore them regardless. She said trousers made her feel free. She could walk, run, and climb without restriction. Without worrying about her hemline. Without performing the image of a properly seated, composed woman waiting to be admired from across a room. The trousers were practical. But they were also, for her, a daily act of insisting on her own terms. One day the studio wardrobe department quietly confiscated her trousers. Hoping that without them she would have no choice but to put on a skirt. Her response was to walk through the studio grounds bare-legged. Unhurried, unashamed, and entirely composed. Step by unhurried step. Until the studio had absolutely no choice but to return her trousers. That story spread widely throughout Hollywood and was retold for decades. It became one of the most celebrated legends of her defiance. Its meaning went far beyond a single piece of clothing. It was a woman using her own body to make her convictions visible. A declaration made without a single spoken word. Clear and impossible to ignore. Through those trousers, Hepburn was telling Hollywood and the entire world. You cannot use deprivation to make me comply. Because I am freer than you will ever understand. In the mid to late 1970s, Hepburn's career suffered a serious blow. She starred in a succession of films that failed at the box office. Films that critics dismissed and audiences avoided. The cumulative effect was damaging. Audiences began to grow weary of her. Critics said she was too self-important. They said her performances were too self-conscious and too lacking in warmth. The qualities that made her unique also made her difficult to embrace for mass audiences accustomed to something more conventional. In 1970, a committee of American theater owners formally added her name to a list of performers they call box office poison. Several other major stars also appeared on that list. But for Hepburn, the designation was a profound and public humiliation. It meant studios were no longer willing to take a financial risk on casting her. It meant the doors that had opened so easily a few years before were now closing. Faced with that situation, many performers would have chosen the path of least resistance. To meet the studio's conditions. To reshape their image according to what the market demanded. To trim away the difficult parts and present a softer, more palatable version of themselves. In plain terms, to stop being who they actually were. But Katharine Hepburn was not that kind of person. She made a decision that was considered genuinely bold at the time. She bought out her own contract directly from the studio. She took back control of her career with her own money. Then she personally went looking for the right material. She believed that if she could find the right role and the right production, she could prove her value all over again. She chose a stage play written by Philip Barry. It was called The Philadelphia Story. She did not simply agree to star in it. She also took on the role of producer, making sure the entire film would be made precisely as she envisioned. In 1970, The Philadelphia Story was released. It was a triumph by any measure. Critically acclaimed and commercially successful beyond all expectation. Hepburn used that film to stage one of the most astonishing career revivals in the entire history of Hollywood. And stood once again at the very top of the industry. That story carries a lesson worth holding on to. Being knocked down does not mean it is over. The real question is how you choose to stand back up. Some people accept defeat after a fall and never quite recover their original self. Hepburn chose to redesign the rules of the game entirely. When we tell the story of Katharine Hepburn, we cannot skip the name Spencer Tracy. In 1970, Hepburn and Tracy first met on the set of the film called Woman of the Year. According to the story that has been told ever since, when Hepburn first encountered Tracy, she remarked that she was afraid she might be too tall for him. Tracy replied that he would soon cut her down to size. That exchange sounds like an easy joke. But it foreshadowed 27 years of one of the most storied and complex partnerships in cinema history. Hepburn and Tracy made 9 films together over those years. Their on-screen chemistry was magnetic and endlessly compelling. Their scenes together possessed a particular kind of electricity. Like two powerful currents meeting and running alongside each other. Full of friction and warmth in equal and shifting measure. Two people matched in intelligence, in stubbornness, and in the particular kind of will that cannot be overridden. Neither one was a subordinate to the other. Neither one faded when the other was in the room. That quality of genuine equality between two strong people was a rare thing to see on screen in that era. And audiences responded to it with an intensity that never entirely faded. But their love story itself lived entirely in shadow. Because Tracy was already married. He had a wife, Louise Tracy, and 2 children. As a devout Catholic, he refused to pursue a divorce. He had made a promise before God. He would not break that promise regardless of what it cost him personally. Their relationship was never publicly acknowledged, and yet it was an open secret throughout Hollywood. Journalists knew. Studio executives knew. Even Louise herself reportedly knew and had accepted the situation in her own quiet way. But all parties maintained a kind of unspoken agreement of silence. For Tracy's sake, Hepburn withdrew almost entirely from public life. She turned down countless invitations for interviews and public appearances. She gave her most valuable and irretrievable time to the man she loved so deeply. She cooked for him. She tended to his health during his difficult years. She stayed beside him through the long struggle with alcoholism and the illnesses of old age. She was, in the most complete sense of the word, present. In 1967, just 17 days after they completed their final film together, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Tracy died suddenly of a heart attack at his home. Hepburn held back her tears. And did not attend his funeral. Because she did not want to cause pain to Louise on the day of her greatest grief. She said afterward that the funeral was Louise's time. Not hers. She would find her own time to grieve. That silent sacrifice revealed a side of Hepburn the world rarely saw. Beneath all that steel was a heart that knew how to love with extraordinary depth. And without asking for any recognition at all. The emotional life of Katharine Hepburn was far richer and more layered than the public ever fully knew. As a young woman she married the playwright Ludlow Ogden Smith in 1948. The marriage lasted only 6 years. Hepburn later said she and Smith shared a genuine and meaningful connection. He was kind and he understood her in ways that others rarely did. But she was simply not suited for the institution of marriage itself. She needed freedom. She needed space. She needed the shape of her life to be hers alone to determine each morning. The constraints of marriage felt like walls closing in on something essential inside her. After their divorce, she and Smith remained close friends for the rest of their lives. Smith eventually became her trusted financial advisor in her later years. That ability to transform a former partner into a lifelong companion rather than an enemy or a stranger speaks to a particular kind of emotional wisdom that Hepburn possessed in abundance. She knew how to love. And she knew how to let go without destroying what had genuinely been good. Beyond Tracy, there was another significant figure in her emotional life. The director John Ford. The two worked together on several films and developed a deep and complicated emotional bond during the 1970s. Ford later said that Hepburn was the most talented woman he had ever encountered in his entire career. These relationships together trace the contours of her inner life. She was not someone who did not know how to love. She simply refused to let love become the price of losing herself. Love, for Hepburn, was something you gave freely. But never at the cost of the person you fundamentally were. In the 1950s, Hollywood was being shaken by the rise of television. The audience that had filled the great movie palaces every weekend was now staying home. Many film stars began to fade into the margins. But Hepburn kept evolving in ways that continued to genuinely surprise people. In 1950 she starred in the film called The African Queen. Opposite the celebrated and formidable actor Humphrey Bogart. The production was shot on location in genuinely demanding and often miserable conditions in the Belgian Congo. The heat was extreme. The insects were relentless. Many members of the crew fell ill from various infections. Food and clean water were in critically short supply throughout the production. The director John Huston was known for his love of extreme locations and he had outdone himself with this one. But Hepburn reportedly remained healthy from beginning to end of the shoot. Her approach was straightforward. She drank only boiled water for the entire duration of the production. Bogart reportedly maintained that whiskey was a perfectly adequate and thoroughly preferable substitute. The African Queen became a genuine and enduring classic of film history. Hepburn played Rose Sayer, the prim and principale sister of a Protestant missionary deep in Africa. A woman who appears on the surface to be rigidly conventional and utterly unable to adapt. But who discovers under extreme pressure unexpected reserves of courage, resourcefulness, and a particular kind of wry humor. That role shattered the audience's fixed idea of Hepburn as purely commanding and certain. It demonstrated the full range she was capable of as a performer. A truly great actor is capable of endless transformation. Every character in Hepburn's hands found its own distinct soul and its own entirely believable truth. In 1960, Hepburn stepped into yet another artistic territory by appearing on Broadway. She starred in a musical called Coco. playing the legendary fashion designer Coco Chanel. Hepburn and Chanel shared a profound kinship of spirit that went beyond the surface resemblance. Both were women who broke the rules of their respective fields with complete deliberateness. Chanel liberated the female body. She freed women from the corsets and elaborate constraints that had physically bound them for generations. She said that fashion should serve the woman wearing it, not the other way around. Hepburn liberated female self-consciousness in a different but equally important way. She showed women on screen and off what it looked like to refuse the rules and still be extraordinary. The musical was a great success. Audiences responded to Hepburn's performance with genuine warmth and considerable enthusiasm. The show ran on Broadway for more than a year. That artistic leap proved once again the extraordinary vitality of her creative life. She was not simply a film actress who had found her way. She was a complete and genuinely multidimensional performing artist. What made the Coco role particularly resonant was the timing. By 1969, Hepburn had already endured more professional ups and downs than most performers experience in a lifetime. She had been declared finished. She had come back. She had loved and lost in ways the public never fully knew. And here she was on a Broadway stage, embodying a woman who had also remade herself multiple times, who had also refused the roles that others tried to assign her. There is something deeply moving about two women like that meeting across the boundary of fiction. One real, one imagined. Both impossible to contain. Katharine Hepburn received 12 Academy Award nominations for Best Actress over the course of her career. That number alone stands as a legend. No other performer has ever matched it. Among all those nominations, she won Best Actress 4 times. For Morning Glory. For Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. For The Lion in Winter. And for On Golden Pond. 4 Academy Awards. Spanning 34 years. From 1933 to 1981. A span unmatched anywhere in the long and crowded history of cinema. Her 4th Oscar arrived when she was 74 years old. 74. Many performers have long since disappeared entirely from the screen by that age. Many others have set LED into comfortable irrelevance. But Hepburn was still burning. Still creating. Still leaving audiences genuinely without words. This calls to mind the classical Chinese image of the old warhorse who still lifts its head toward the distant road. The years may have added lines to her face, but they could never put out the fire in her heart. That fire was not something that age could reach. To understand what those 4 Oscars truly represent, we have to understand what the industry looked like at the time each one arrived. The first, in 1933, came to a young woman who had been told she was not beautiful enough for Hollywood. It was a declaration that talent could override convention. The second, in 1967, came at a moment of enormous personal grief. Just 17 days after Tracy had died, Hepburn still showed up. She delivered a performance of extraordinary grace and restraint, playing a woman in the process of letting go of something precious. Which was, in a sense, exactly what she herself was doing. The 3rd Oscar came in 1968, for The Lion in Winter. In that film she played Eleanor of Aquitaine, a medieval queen of formidable intelligence and equally formidable will. A woman who matches her king in cunning and surpasses him in clarity. It was, in many ways, the role most naturally aligned with who Hepburn actually was. The 4th Oscar, in 1982, came for a film called On Golden Pond, in which she played opposite Henry Fonda in what would be his final screen performance. 2 legendary actors in their final season together. The scene where she throws her arms around him after he nearly drowns. And the moment where she successfully executes a backflip off the dock just to prove she can. Those 2 moments together capture everything about who she was. The tenderness was real. And the refusal to accept the limits of age was just as real. 4 Oscars across 5 decades. Each one a chapter in a story that refused to reach its ending. The influence of Katharine Hepburn on the consciousness of women extended far beyond her films. In an era when actresses were typically treated as decorative accessories to the male lead, as pleasant surfaces reflecting the hero's light back to the audience, the women Hepburn played on screen possessed a fierce and unmistakable sense of agency. They had their own ideas, their own judgments, their own particular ways of seeing the world that no one else could quite replicate. And sometimes they were smarter, braver, and more compelling than the men in the story. Not because the scripts made them superior, but because Hepburn brought something to every character she touched that refused to be subordinate. She refused to portray passive or victimized women. She once made a remark that became famous, to the effect that if you always obey the rules, you miss all the fun. That line captures the essential spirit of her entire philosophy. She spent her whole life living that truth without apology. Never obedient. Never compromising. Never fading from view. Her very existence was a kind of declaration. A woman can be sharp-edged. can be deliberately unpleasing, can fall entirely outside every conventional standard of beauty and softness and compliance, and still be extraordinary, still be impossible to ignore, still leave a mark on history that cannot be erased no matter how much time passes. In her later years, Hepburn lived in her seaside home in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. This was a house she had known since childhood, a place full of family memory and the sensory textures of her earliest years. The smell of sea air and wood and old books. She never remarried. She chose to live entirely and completely on her own terms. Swimming every day regardless of the temperature. Playing tennis with characteristic intensity. Reading voraciously. Tending her garden with genuine attention and care. She said her life was her own, and no one had any right to make decisions about it for her. Even in old age she kept her sharp and unapologetic edge. She turned down most interview requests, and spoke only when she judged it truly worth her time. On one occasion a reporter asked why she refused so many interviews. Her answer was direct. She said most people did not ask interesting enough questions. That response is perfectly, completely Katharine Hepburn. Direct, unsparing, and carrying a particular kind of disarming honesty. Honesty was the absolute core of her character. She never said things she did not mean. Not even when the version she actually meant was harder to hear. Not even when the softer version would have made everyone around her more comfortable. Being comfortable was simply never her primary goal. Being true was. What is remarkable about Hepburn's later years is not that she chose solitude. It is that she chose it with such evident satisfaction. She was not a woman withdrawing from a world that had rejected her. She was a woman who had always known what she wanted, and who had finally arrived at the version of her life that required the least compromise. She swam in the cold ocean into her 80s. She pruned her roses with the same attention she brought to a script. She read widely and thought seriously. She kept a circle of genuine friends close. And she had no patience for the rest. When the essayist and journalist Barbara Walters came to interview her, Hepburn reportedly told her that she asked too many questions. When pressed on what she considered the most important quality a person could have, Hepburn answered without hesitation. Curiosity. She said people who are curious are never truly alone, because the world is always offering them something worth paying attention to. That answer tells you almost everything you need to know about who she was. Not someone who defined herself through other people's attention, but someone who found the world itself endlessly interesting enough to require no audience. On June 29, 2003, Katharine Hepburn passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 96 years old. When news of her death reached the world, Hollywood fell into a particular kind of silence. That silence was not simply the mourning of a great actress. It felt more like paying tribute to an entire era. An era when women began to define themselves on their own terms. Major newspapers across America ran her story on the front page. People throughout the film world offered their tributes and their memories. They recalled her courage and her craft and her absolute refusal to be diminished. But perhaps the most moving responses came from ordinary people who wrote letters. Many of them said Hepburn had given them something crucial and lasting. She had helped them believe that being themselves was enough. That being a woman who did not fit the standard was not a flaw to be corrected. It was a kind of freedom to be embraced. That kind of influence cannot be measured by any award ever given. It lies in the choices people made in their own lives. Long after the credits roll, Hepburn's legacy is also visible in the generations of actresses who came after her. Women who refused the expected shape of stardom. Who brought intelligence and physical presence and genuine will to their work. The director and actor Jodie Foster has spoken of Hepburn as a foundational figure. Someone who proved that a female star could also be an artist in the deepest sense. Meryl Streep, who like Hepburn has accumulated nominations and awards beyond what seemed possible, has described watching Hepburn as a formative experience. Not just because of the skill, but because of the refusal to perform anything other than total commitment. Cate Blanchett, who won her own Oscar playing Katharine Hepburn in the film Khalid the Aviator, has said that preparing for that role was one of the most demanding and illuminating experiences of her career. Because she had to try to embody someone who was fundamentally incapable of being imitated. Someone whose every gesture came from too deep and too personal a source to simply be copied. These responses point to something important. Hepburn did not simply create a template that others followed. She broke the template. And in breaking it she made space for everyone who came after to build something entirely their own. That is perhaps the most lasting gift any artist can leave. Not a model to be reproduced, but a permission to be genuinely, fully, and without apology original. The influence of Katharine Hepburn has not diminished since her death. If anything, it has continued to grow with each year that passes. When we speak about women's autonomy in the workplace, when we discuss the freedom of women to wear what they choose, when we admire women who fall entirely outside conventional beauty standards and captivate the world completely anyway. The presence of Hepburn is felt in all of it. During her lifetime she received countless honors. The American Film Institute ranked her the greatest female star in the history of American cinema. Not among the greatest. The greatest, with no qualification. She was inducted into the American Comedy Hall of Fame. A minor planet was named in her honor. But I believe what Hepburn herself valued most deeply was not the awards or the titles or the recognition that came with decades of work. It was that she had lived precisely as she wanted to live. She never allowed anyone to turn her into someone other than herself. That steadfast and lifelong commitment to one's own deepest nature, in a world that relentlessly and cleverly pressures people to compromise and to conform, is one of the rarest and most genuinely valuable qualities a human being can possess. There is a story about Hepburn from her later years. During an interview, a journalist asked her, "If you could live your life over again, would you change anything?" Hepburn considered the question for a long, honest moment. Then said no. She would not change a single thing. She had made mistakes. Genuinely and sometimes seriously. She had hurt people she cared about. She had been hurt as well, sometimes deeply. But throughout all of it she had always been herself. Fully and without apology. And that was enough? That was more than enough. That answer echoes the core teaching of classical Chinese Taoist wisdom. Those who know sufficiency are truly wealthy. Hepburn never measured her worth by the standards that others had constructed for her. She had her own measure. She lived by that measure for 96 years. And she left quietly with a heart at peace. No regrets needed. No regrets deserved. Because every single day of that life had been genuinely and irreversibly hers. Let us think one final time about those trousers. The trousers that were confiscated by the studio. The trousers that made Hepburn walk bare-legged through an entire film lot rather than surrender a single inch of her ground. Those trousers were not simply an article of clothing. They were a declaration. They said, "My body is my own. My choices are my own. My life is my own. No one has any right to use clothing, or rules, or expectations, or definitions to determine who I am." Katharine Hepburn spent her complete and entire life bearing witness to that declaration in everything she did. And today, when women live in a world where they can wear whatever they choose, enter any profession they aspire to, chase any dream they are bold enough to name, we should remember that this path was walked by someone first. It was not given. It was claimed. Hepburn was one of the people who walked it at the very front. She walked straight. She walked proud. And she never once looked back to see if the world approved. There is a particular scene from late in her life that captures this quality perfectly. When she was well into her 80s and walking with some difficulty. A reporter who happened to encounter her in a park in New York noticed she was wearing, yes, trousers. Wide leg ones, just as she had always preferred. The reporter, slightly nervous, asked if she had any advice for young women. Hepburn looked at him for a moment. Then said something to the effect that she had no advice. But she had a suggestion. Stop asking for advice. Start paying attention to what you actually want. Then go after it before you run out of time. That is not a lesson from a motivational speaker. That is a lesson from someone who had lived it. Every single day. For 96 years. We pay tribute to Katharine Hepburn. Thank her for refusing to be tamed. Thank her for her extraordinary and unbreakable pride. Thank her for showing us that true freedom is never given by others. It is something you claim entirely for yourself. One deliberate, uncompromising, bare-legged step at a time. See you next time.